From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Good morning. I'm Karen Jaffe. I'm head of the Young Reader Center, which is the co-sponsor, along with the Center for the Book, of this Books and Beyond for Young People. And our director of the Center for the Book, John Cole, is in the back. You can raise your hand. Thank you, John. I'd like to first welcome our very special guests. I'd like students from Capital Day School to raise your hand so we know who you are. Thank you. Rivers Charter School, raise your hand. Great. Okay. We actually have one more school that will be coming shortly, but we're going to start. And if Monica Valentine is here, if she could just help coordinate them around the sides, that would be great. I was fortunate enough this weekend to see the motion picture Selma. And some of you may have heard about it. It's a movie based on historical events. But what you're going to hear and see today is something much more valuable and special, because you're going to meet one of the actual marchers from Selma to Montgomery. The youngest one, in fact, and you're going to hear her true story and see original footage from the incidents and even some primary sources from the time. Her book is called Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. Lynda Blackmon Lowery was the first young person to take part in the Voting Rights March of 1965. She now works as a case manager at a mental health center, and she still lives in Selma. We're honored to have her today, and she has told her story to two writers, Elspeth Leacock and Susan Buckley, who have corroborated on 5 history books for children. Among her favorite projects, Elspeth has also written the Geography Brain Quest and the African Experience in New York. And when not writing children's books for 17 years, Susan edited AppleSeeds children's magazine. Both Elspeth and Susan live in New York City. So here are the logistics today. All the authors will be speaking about 30 or 40 minutes, and then there will be a Q&A. Our main focus is on the students, so we'll hear from them first with their questions, and if there's time, we will certainly take questions from the adults in the room as well. Students, when it's time to ask questions, we will be giving you a microphone. Please wait for it. We hope you give your name and your school. This program is being videotaped, so it helps to have everyone's question to the microphone so it could be recorded. I think that's all for now, and I'm going to turn it over to our authors.
Good morning, and thank you all for coming. About 10 years ago, Elspeth and I wrote a book called Journeys for Freedom, in which we told 20 stories of American history. And one of the events we knew we wanted to include was the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March. So we started by phoning the small Voting Rights Museum in Selma. And a very nice woman answered the phone, and we explained to her that we wanted to talk to someone who had been on the march, who'd actually been on the march. And preferably it would be a kid, somebody who was a young person on the march. And so she said, well, the person you need to talk to is my sister, Lynda. So the next thing we know, we called Lynda. And as soon as we began to hear Lynda's story, Elspeth and I knew we had found a remarkable person who was a witness to history, who was a history maker herself. So we talked to Lynda a lot over the next month or so, and we created a story, a short with about 750 words, and showed a beautiful picture map and whatever, and that was the Journeys for Freedom story. And then when Elspeth and I began to present the book, we created a presentation called History, It Can't Happen Without You, because we wanted to show kids like you that there are times in American history where it would not have happened without kids. And the civil rights movement is one of those times, and most people don't realize that today. So we centered the story on Lynda. And then we all met in Chicago, and we were making a presentation. And we realized that Lynda was inspiring us and the kids so much by her story and the longer story that we would actually write a book just about, together, the three of us, about Lynda's story. So we have 35 hours of taped interviews with Lynda, a lot of it on the phone, but some of it in person. And Lynda's voice is so strong that Elspeth and I were able to create this book with Lynda and channeling her voice.
Good morning. Let me read you some of my story. By the time I was 15 years old, I had been in jail 9 times. I was born in Selma, Alabama in 1950. In those days, you were born black or you were born white in Selma. There was a big difference. Where I lived, everyone was black. I lived in the George Washington Carver homes, the good old GWC. My buddies and I felt safe because everyone watched out for everyone else. We went to black churches, we attended black schools, and we had caring black teachers. The Ku Klux Klan stayed away from us. They drove through other black neighborhoods, hiding their faces with sheets over their heads and yelling racial slurs, blowing their horns and cursing and shooting their guns. They rode through areas where they knew they could scare people. They would not ride through the GWC homes, so I felt safe and secure.
When Lynda was 7 years old, her mother died.
When my mother died, I heard people say, if she hadn't been colored, she would still be alive. But the hospital was for whites only. My mother died as a result of her skin color. I just believed that. So segregation hurt my family, and it hurt me. After my mother's funeral, my grandmother moved in, and she was one determined woman. She was going to raise us up to be strong and determined too. I remember her saying as she brushed my hair once that there is nothing more precious walking on this earth than you. You are a child of God. So hold your head up and believe in yourself. It was my grandmother who first took me to see Dr. King. That's Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. That was back in 1963, when I was 13 years old. The church was packed. When Dr. King began to speak, everyone got real quiet. The way he sounded made you want to do what he was talking about, and he was talking about voting, the right to vote and what it would take for our parents to get it. He was talking about nonviolence and how you could persuade people to do things your way with steady, loving confrontation. I'll never forget those words, steady, loving confrontation. And the way he said it, We children, we really didn't understand what he was talking about, but we wanted to do what he was saying. Who is with me, Dr. King asked. And we all stood up clapping. By the time we left the meeting that night, Dr. King had a commitment from me and everyone else in church to do whatever it would take, non-violently, to get the right to vote.
At that time, Lynda was already in the civil rights movement. High school students were trying to integrate Selma by going to whites-only places like the Dairy Queen and lunch counters. Lynda couldn't take part in these sit-ins because she was too young, but her job was to go for help. So they called her the gopher, because she would go for someone's mama when the older kids were put in jail.
That all changed on January 2nd, 1965. That's when Dr. King came to Selma for a big mass meeting at Brown Chapel. There were about 700 people there, and I was one of them. When Dr. King walked in, everyone stood and cheered. He talked about the vote and how we would get it. He told us we must be ready to march. His voice grew louder as he continued, we must be ready to go to jail by the thousands. By the end, he shouted out, our cry is a simple one. Give us the ballot.
For years, Black people tried to register to vote, but they were mostly turned away. Just for trying to register, they could lose their jobs. Whenever a Black person tried to register, someone would take a picture and then show it to that person's boss. Mm-hmm. White people could fire Black people whenever and however they wanted.
That's why the civil rights leaders needed us children to march. After Dr. King's speech, our local leaders planned 2 or 3 marches for us every day. They would say, we're going to march to the courthouse tomorrow. If you're with us, come to Brown Chapel at 9:30. The very first time I heard that, I said, I'm going to march.
Before the marchers set out, the adults told them, you're going to go to jail. Do not fight back. You might be hit. You might be pushed. Just turn the other cheek. Do not fight back. Don't worry about it. We'll take care of you.
The first time I went to jail, I was 14, and I was scared. I didn't know what they were going to do to us. There must have been about 100 boys and girls at the time. All of us girls were packed into one cell meant for 2 people. After the first time, I wasn't afraid because I was with my buddies, and we knew we had each other's back. What we could do with each other's back now, I don't know. Those white policemen had billy clubs and guns, but we held on to each other, and we figured there was safety in numbers. It helped when we sang We Shall Overcome. We sang it to let everyone know we were on our way, we would not be ignored, and we definitely would not be stopped.
Lynda and her classmates had to leave school to march, but their teachers, who couldn't vote, supported them. They unlocked the back doors of the school to let groups of students out to march.
For weeks we marched and we went to jail over and over again. Then the police shot Jimmy Lee Jackson in a nearby town. I didn't know Jimmy Lee, but when I heard the news, I was scared for him and for all of us. Jimmy Lee had been peacefully marching in Marion, about 30 miles away. The marchers were singing freedom songs when the state troopers and police attacked them. As Jimmy Lee tried to protect his mother, a state trooper shot him in the stomach. While Jimmy Lee Jackson was in the hospital, it just seemed that everything got more dangerous. Even jail got more dangerous.
That's when Lynda and her friends were put in the infamous sweat box.
Now, the sweat box didn't have any windows. It was an iron room with an iron door. They pushed us right in, closed the door, and locked it. I don't know how long we were in there. It could have been 5 minutes, it could have been 5 hours. All I know is every one of us passed out from the heat. There was no air, no bed, no toilets, no sinks. There was nothing but heat in that iron box. It was dark, too. There wasn't any lights, and we couldn't see anything, and we didn't know anything. When we came to, some prisoners was carrying us out of the sweat box into a courtroom. By the time I got out of jail that day, Jimmy Lee Jackson had died. I went straight to the funeral with my daddy.
After Jimmy Lee, oh no, shoot, I'm sorry.
After Jimmy Lee Jackson's death, there was a call for a great march to protest his murder. It would be a whole new kind of march, a big march with everybody, adults along with the kids. On Sunday, March 7th, a crowd of marchers set out from Brown Chapel.
When we got to the top of the Edmund Pettus Bridge going out of town, all I could see was a sea of white people. That's when I got nervous. The road was full of white men on foot and on horseback. They were state troopers and sheriff's deputies. Along the road were white people sitting on their cars waving Confederate flags. All of a sudden, a cloud of tear gas was burning my lungs and my eyes. I couldn't breathe and I couldn't see. It was terrifying. I didn't realize it then, but it was tear gas. The next thing I knew, I felt a man's hand grab me from behind, pulling me backwards. I heard him say those hateful words. Then I bit the hand that was on the front of me, and that's when he hit me over the eye. He hit me twice, hard. I was kneeling, struggling to get up, when he pushed me forward and hit me again, this time on the back of my head. I staggered up and I ran. I ran right into the tear gas. But this big white man kept on running after me and hitting me. And people were screaming and hollering and yelling, and my heart was pounding so fast I thought that it would burst. I didn't know what I was doing. I just ran.
We're going to play some original film footage from a documentary film called King. You will see what happened that day. You'll see the police advancing on peaceful protesters, just as Lynda described. In fact, you'll see Lynda in a moment in there. You'll see these protesters being hurt through police beatings with tear gas and through crowd movement. These 2.5 minutes are hard to watch.
This march is intended to keep off the highway. We will be marching on the shoulder of the road and will not in any way be interfering with the pursuit of traffic. And we urge you to be careful to make sure that you don't get on the highway anyway. Be detrimental to your safety. Continue this march, and I'm saying that this is an unlawful assembly. You are to disperse. Your order to disperse, go home, or go to your church. This march will not continue. Troopers here, advance toward the group. See that they disperse.
That's me.
As she ran, Lynda saw her little sister, Joanne. You have to take over.
She looked, we've read this so many times. She looked like she was dead, lying in a man's arms. But the man told Lynda she had only fainted. Lynda grabbed Joanne's hand and they ran until they reached safety in the First Baptist Church. Lots of people there had been hurt. When one man saw Lynda, he said, "This child is bleeding bad. She's got to go to the hospital." At the hospital, she received 7 stitches over her eye and 28 in the back of her head. While she was getting stitched up, people across the country were watching a special news report on TV. They saw what happened in Selma that day, the day reporters called Bloody Sunday.
When I woke up the next day, I heard that Dr. King was planning a march to Montgomery, the state capital, more than 50 miles away. Dr. King wanted to show Governor Wallace and the world that black people still demanded the right to vote, that beatings and violence would not stop us. But I wanted to go and show George Wallace what he had done to me. I wanted him to see my swollen face and my bandaged head. I wanted to let him know that he wasn't going to do that to me ever again. When I told Daddy I wanted to go, he said no. It would be way too dangerous, but I pleaded and I begged. He'd have to tie me up and lock me in the house to keep me from going, I told him.
In the end, Lynda was so determined, her father agreed to let her go on the march when 2 women promised to look after her.
On March 21st, day 1 of the march, I was proud. We had finally won something. We won the right to march down the highway and be protected. The day was cloudy and misty, but the crowd at Brown Chapel was so full of joy.
This is a newsreel that appeared on television and in movie theaters at that time.
On day
She's gonna play. On day 2, the march started an hour late, all because of Lynda.
The next morning, I woke up on the ground wrapped in a blanket, my head on the little canvas bag that held my stuff. All around me, women were waking up, maybe about 150 of them lying in long rows. It was March 22nd, 1965, my 15th birthday. When I left the tent, I walked out into a foggy, dreary morning. In front of me, I saw 3 National Guardsmen. I started screaming and just couldn't stop. I was scared that they were going to kill me to finish the job that they had started 2 weeks earlier. I was terrified. All I wanted to do was go home. I didn't care if George Wallace saw me or not. I didn't care if anybody ever voted. I just wanted to get back to my daddy so he could protect me. Running back into the tent, I yelled, "They're going to kill me. Don't let them kill me." And a lot of people wanted to send me home. They were mad because I was holding up the whole march. But the ladies that I was with said I was too scared to go back home in that condition. They tried to comfort me, to ease my fear. They talked about the significance of what we were doing and how far we had come in the struggle, but I could not be comforted. To me, it was Bloody Sunday all over again. I was that scared. But this white guy named Jim Lederer came over. He had lost a leg in a war, and that he was walking all the way to Montgomery on crutches. Jim told me before he let anyone harm another hair on my head, he would lay down and die for me. I knew I couldn't let this man do that for me. I just knew I couldn't let him do more for me than I could do for myself. So that moment, I knew if this man was willing to die for me, then I really had to give up the fear of dying for myself. I knew I had to do this, and I could do it. When the march finally began that morning, Jim and I marched and talked and sang freedom songs together down the highway.
Lynda takes us with her on the 4-day march. They were days filled with friendship, hardship, and a lot of rain.
On the 4th day of the march, thousands of people joined us as we got to the outskirts of Montgomery. It felt awesome. I had done it. I had really done it. I was there. And deep inside of me, all that fear that something might happen to me and the pain and anger that had driven me was released. I fell down on the ground and I just cried and cried and cried. I just couldn't stop crying until I let it all out. And then it was gone. I was free. The next morning, March 25th, I knew I was going to see George Wallace and he was going to see me. Everything was different that day. There was even more people now, more than 25,000. My buddies was there, kids I went to jail with so many times. My daddy was there too, and we were all singing and happy, marching to the Capitol. When I got to the Capitol, I looked for Governor Wallace in the windows. They said he was behind the curtains, peeping out, but I couldn't tell. I got as close as I could and I shouted, "I'm here, Governor Wallace, I'm here." So everybody in the governor's office surely got to see my bandages. Somebody did, I know. There were a lot of speakers, which made the day a long day. Then it was over. What began on Bloody Sunday was done at last. I went home to Selma and back to school, but I was a different person. We still had mass meetings, but we didn't march or go to jail anymore. I had learned so much. I just had to think about it all for a while. And while I was thinking, something happened. On August 6, 1965, the United States Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. We have won. My buddies and I, who had gone to jail so many times, had won. Everyone on that march to Montgomery won. We were determined to do something, and we did it. If you are determined, you can overcome your fears, and then you can change the world. The Selma movement was a children's movement. We didn't know it at the time, but we were making history. You have a voice too. And with determination, you can be a history maker just like me.
Thank you. Very exciting. Okay, now the students have a chance to ask some questions. I want to remind you to give your name and your school, and we'll try to get a mic to you and pass it around to the person who's being called on. And I'll point you out so that we can have some kind of logic to this. Okay, you want to start with some questions? Anybody? Okay, right over there.
My name is Tyron. I go to Two Rivers Public School, and I'm 13. My question is, racism and segregation was hard back then, as we can see, but in the 21st century now, with Mike Brown and the Eric Garner cases and situations, how do you feel about racism currently now?
I'm going to give you a little quote of something that I read recently, and then I want you to think about it. I was reading a book in my library called Racism, and it was written in 1972. And on that book is a blurb that says something to the effect of, doctors say hatred and racism hurts. It causes things like high blood pressure and diabetes and other physical illnesses. It also says, just imagine how the person that's receiving that racism and hatred might feel. And this blurb was on the posters in buses, on buses and in the subway in New York City in 1972. And it was on there because the New York City Commission on Human Rights had it there. That's how I feel about racism, hatred, and what is going on today. It's something that hurts. And if it hurts you to feel that way about another person, just imagine how the person you hate or show that racism to must feel.
Well, that's an amazing statement for this whole program. Thank you, Lynda. Do we have any other questions? Okay. Right here in the front.
My name's Cece, I'm 14, and I'm from Capitol Hill Day School. And my question is, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had gone home that one day?
Yes. I think if I had gone home that day, I never would be the person I am now. I think I would have been filled with a lot of hatred. And I would be one racist person now. One hateful, ugly, racist person now. I just feel that I would have. Because at that time, fear would have taken over. And the hatred would, would be very present. And we tend to hate things or dislike things that we don't understand a lot of times. And that fear was something that I didn't understand within me at that time.
You want to go back to, yes, right here.
My name's Autumn. I'm 13 years old, and I go to Capitol Hill Day School. Have you done any recent sit-ins or marches or protests?
No, not recently. In the past, in the past year, illness has visited me and my household a lot. I've been in the hospital this past year like 3 times. I just got out of the hospital on New Year's Day for the 3rd time, this past year. So I haven't had an opportunity to do anything. However, I am on Facebook, and I certainly encourage every day that somebody take up the mantle and let their voice be known, be heard.
Okay, right behind. Yeah.
My name is Charlie Gray. I go to Capitol Hill Day School and I'm 13. When you walked to Montgomery, about how many people of the marchers were white?
Oh, there was a good percentage, and I would say about 20% of those marchers were white that walked, that was in the original 300 that walked. But daily, on that walk, someone was joining us. Other marchers would join us if just for, so many miles that day. They would join us and then leave. I never counted the number of people, but I would say about 20% of the entire 300 were white.
And I think your descriptions of what it meant to you when so many white people came to Selma is really interesting for the kids to hear.
As I told you in the in reading my story, that I grew up during a time during segregation, and my father was this big, strong black man, and it would just be awesome to see him change when we went in stores that were owned by white people. He would get so humble, and he would hold his head down, and he would have his hat in his hand, and he'd just play with that hat. And they would call my big, strong, handsome black father boy, and other derogatory names. And it was awesome to see that change in him, because no matter how he tried to explain it, I just couldn't understand it. Why he had to hold his head down and why he couldn't look in someone's face. If I had grown up knowing just that segregated system of white people again, I would be a very hate-ridden person. But when people saw us marching, saw us beating, and other white people came to Selma, I saw a whole new person. These people called my daddy Mister. They gave him the respect that every other black person gave him. They stayed with us. They ate the collard greens and fried chicken and cornbread with us. I mean, they were a different group of people, and I'm so glad I saw them, met them, that they cared enough to come to Selma, that they cared enough, because they showed me the love of everybody, and not just my black friends and the black people I grew up with. They showed me the love of everybody.
Any other questions from the students? Do we have any questions from the adults in the audience? Is there one back there?
That was Mrs. Amelia Boynton and Mrs. Mary Lamar. My father agreed to let me march when Mrs. Boynton, who was a strong female black leader, adult leader in the movement, Mrs. Mary Lamar, who was one of our neighbors and also a member of the movement, and Mrs. Marie Foster, whom we call Mom Foster, who was another strong black female of the movement, when they said that they needed help. And they would take care of me, make sure nothing happened to me. And he loved and respected these women. So he let his child go, knowing that I would be taken care of.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more and then we have to move on. Yes?
I was just going to ask how much time elapsed in between the time of marching and actually the bill being passed. Do you know about how long it was?
I didn't.
How long was it before the bill was passed from the march in Selma until the time the government actually moved and passed the bill?
From March of 1965
Right.
to August 6th of 1965. The Voting Rights Act was passed in Congress right before they segregated the all-white high school in Selma. School began in Selma in September of each year. And my sister was one of the 8 young black people that segregated the all-white high school. That integrated the all-white segregated high school. And that was Parish High School.
Okay, the last question. Yes.
I've heard you speak once before, and I thought it was so interesting talking about seeing Malcolm X, and I thought maybe you could share that with the students today.
Dr. King had been arrested and was in a Selma jail for a week, almost a week. I know it was a long time. And Malcolm X came to Selma and spoke. Malcolm X, now Dr. King always talked about steady, loving confrontation and nonviolence. That night, Malcolm X spoke at Brown Chapel Church. I was right behind him in the choir stand because I was a member of the Freedom Choir. And Malcolm X came and said, okay, we are going to pick up our guns, our weapons, and go and get the right to vote. After Malcolm spoke that night, within 1 hour, they let Dr. King out of jail. They figured, and when I say they, I mean the white policemen, they figured that they'd rather have a nonviolent movement than to have a movement where they had this black man talking about shooting and killing and getting the right to vote. So Dr. King came on out of jail.
Okay, I have a few announcements, and I'm going to ask Carol Johnson, is Carol here? To come up, a senior director in the exhibits division of the library, to make an announcement. But I just want to call a few things to your attention. The Young Reader Center has created children's bibliography on civil rights, and they're green and they're on that table. We hope the students will take them home. The exhibit division has also provided you with a poster of the exhibit. And also, Susan and Elspeth had been showing you some of the artifacts that they brought, and the library has a few pieces from the library manuscripts and prints division, which is on that table. So feel free to look at that if you have time. And most significantly, we're following the program with book signing, which will take place in a few minutes. They're just setting up. So if Carol's not here, oh, okay, come on. It's hard with the light.
Good morning. I'm Carol Johnson Welsh, and I'm one of the exhibit directors for the Civil Rights Act of 1964, A Long Struggle for Freedom. The exhibition is divided into 6 sections: prologue, segregation, which is on a special screen, World War II and post-war years, the Civil Rights era, and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and finally the impact. There are 2 films, 10 AV stations, and historical timelines throughout. The exhibition addresses petitions made against slavery, the denial of civil rights, and the long struggle for freedom endured by individuals, grassroots organizations, and through the 3 branches of government. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 secured equal rights for African Americans to restaurants, transportation, and other public facilities. It also gave them access to better education and jobs. The Civil Rights Era section in our exhibit highlights many of the milestone events leading up to the Selma to Montgomery March, which was so poignantly described in the book today, Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. The AV screens in the Civil Rights Era section shows firsthand accounts of individuals recounting their experience as youths during the Civil Rights Movement, along with historical images of students participating in the sit-ins. We also have primary documents of the Little Rock 9 students who integrated Little Rock High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957. We have early youth marches in 1958 and 1959, and the Freedom Bus rides in 1961. This coming March, the library will be adding new items to the exhibit, including a document from the new Rosa Parks collection that feature instructions given to boycott participants in 1956 by Mrs. Parks, and a transcript from the papers of civil rights activist James Foreman that describes what happened on March 7, 1965 Bloody Sunday. So I encourage you and your families to go upstairs and view the exhibition or come back later. The exhibit is open to the public Monday through Saturday from 8:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. until September 12th, 2015. There is also an online version of the exhibition at loc.gov/exhibits/Civil Rights Act, which features the films and some of the audio-visual clips in the exhibition. And we also have exhibit posters for you in the back for takeaways. Thank you. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.